gather with understanding and respect and acknowledge the traditional owners, the custodians of this land. In our language of music, we pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and we offer our support to the emerging leaders of our shared future.
Hello and welcome to this special MSO NAIDOC Week event, Always Was, Always Will Be. My name is Ben Northey. I'm the Principal Conductor in Residence of the MSO, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the home of the MSO where we are tonight, the Bunwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Well, I am delighted to be with you tonight as we have the chance to help celebrate NAIDOC Week and to meet and hear performances by some of Australia's finest Indigenous musicians and performers. We just heard a performance of Deborah Cheetham's specially composed Acknowledgement of Country, Long Time Living Here, performed by MSO musicians Anne-Marie Johnson, Tiffany Cheng, Christopher Moore, David Berlin and speaker David Thomas. And I'm really delighted to be joined by some guests here tonight. The Yorta Yorta soprano, composer and educator Deborah Cheetham, a great friend of the MSO who's joining us from Perth. We'll be hearing from Deborah shortly. Yorta Yorta musician, composer Allara Briggs-Pattison. Great to have you here, Allara. And Noongar conductor and violist Aaron Wyatt. And I'm delighted to have you here as well, Aaron. So as I mentioned, this is a particularly special week. NAIDOC Week celebrates the history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And this year, NAIDOC Week's theme of 2020 is Always Was, Always Will Be. And it recognises that First Nations people have occupied and cared for this continent for over 65,000 years. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were Australia's first explorers, their first navigators, our first engineers, our first farmers, our first botanists, first scientists, first diplomats, first astronomers, and really importantly for us tonight, our first artists. And tonight we have the chance to celebrate some of the finest First Nations artists performing in and with Australia's national orchestras and musical organisations, and really importantly learn about some of the First Nations-led organisations and the events and initiatives which have enriched our cultural lives and deepened our understanding. So tonight's event will be an evening of conversation and song. We've already heard Deborah Cheetham's musical Acknowledgement of Country, as I mentioned, Long Time Living Here, and we'll shortly hear an excerpt of Aaron Wyatt's new work, currently in development, and he'll be performing Nanyubak, which is again by Deborah, as well as another work of Deborah's called Gulaga, and we'll be hearing about that as well. So lots to look forward to. But I thought we'd start tonight by just having a bit of a discussion and meeting my guests tonight, Deborah, Allara and Aaron. So Deborah, maybe first to you over in Perth. Thank you so much for joining us for this event. It's wonderful to have technology bring us all together across the continent in this way. Tell me, what does NAIDOC Week mean to you? And perhaps you can also talk about the origins of the First Nations-led organisations that you are so heavily involved with, such as Short Black Opera, Ensemble du Tala and the Dangala Children's Choir, and why they are so important.
Thanks so much, Ben, and hello to my colleagues, Aaron and Allara, and to everyone who's joining us. I am on the land of the Noongar people. It's your country, Aaron, so I pay particular respect to you and your family, and to everyone who is living on whichever nation that you join us. I pay respects to each and every nation. You know, I'm going to begin with thanking the quartet for playing that beautiful performance of My Long Time Living Here, and for David Thomas reading what was the original intended text from MSO. But as we developed the project Long Time Living Here, each nation in Victoria who responded with language of their own making. So I'm going to read to you first of all the actual Bunwarang text that if I was there, I would have sung it for you. So it begins, I'll speak in English first. Be here with love and respect. You've come together today on the land of the Yalukit Willam, that's the river people. It is Bunjil's river country of the Bunwarang. Why have you come here today? Understand and respect the river country. Come here and respect the strong country. Magali Nalimbe, Yara Bilangba Tilbrook, Yaragawa Nalimbe Garaba Yalukit Willam Bik Ut, Bunjil Biraranga Bunwarang, Windara Nalimbe Nanjin Yalimbu, Nan Ba Tilbrook, Biraranga, Nalingu Tilbrook, Wurungibik. I particularly want to pay my respects to Auntie Carolyn Briggs, who gifted that language to the project, and to all the elders who gifted their language. They're the very same people who were born of the pioneers of our First Nations people who gave us the first NAIDOC week, this national day of commemoration that for me is now a day of celebration. I think many First Nations people, you'll speak to them and they'll say, actually, NAIDOC is their favourite week in the year. There's so much to celebrate, there always has been. But I think where we've arrived now in 2020, 2021, let's just sweep 2020 out of the way. Where we've arrived at now is a point where so many more Australians are understanding that there's a much deeper belonging, that even though there's so much that people will be proud of in their own lives and perhaps the journey of their families on this country, that there's a much deeper belonging that we can have. And for me, I think that pioneer companies such as Bangara, the work of the late and much beloved David Page, I would say, one of the most prolific First Nations composers, one of the most prolific Australian composers of all. I think the pioneer work of organisations like Bangara have inspired me to dream about an Australia that can be informed of its belongings through our art making. And of course, for me, that's music. The central focus of my life and my partner, Tony, and the third member of our team, who Ben, you spoke to last night, Jessica Hitchcock, the central focus of our lives over this last period of 12 years has been short black opera. Yes, we're an opera company, but so much more. I've been tempted to change the name, but I'm not going to, because that's our roots. And in a way, opera is such a fabulous definition for what art making is for First Nations people, not siloed in any way. The singer is the dancer is the painter, the storyteller. And that's what opera's all about, bringing all those arts together. Short black opera gave birth to one of the most joyous ensembles that I have ever had the pleasure of leading in my life, and that's Dangala Children's Choir. In fact, Dangala Children's Choir almost predates short black opera. They're a group now I think our original members of Dangala Children's Choir, who came together for the first time in 2009, some of those members have their own children now. That's the way to grow a choir. But that's the way we do things. It's a long continuation. It's a continuation, in fact, of the longest music practice in the world. And so now, today, we're going to be talking about and celebrating a new initiative of short black opera, and that is Ensemble Dutala.
Well, this
I'm
sounds
not
very
sure whether
interesting.
I'm not sure whether we're going to cut each other out, so I'll leave that little pause to draw breath, which I usually don't do.
In future, I'll jump into those little silences, Deborah, for sure. But tell me about Ensemble Dutala, because this is fantastic, and we also have two of the foundation members here with us tonight, and I'll ask them about it as well. Perhaps you can just talk about what it actually is.
Sure. Well, we're seeing a generation of First Nations composers who are writing music for classical ensembles. And, you know, there's an interesting history, which we don't have nearly enough time tonight to go into, but of non-Indigenous composers drawing on Indigenous histories and cultural contexts and cultural material. And it may be a debt that we're going to have to retire as we move forward into empowering First Nations composers to write in the classical idiom, as I have done for the last 20 years. Now we're seeing many more composers emerge, and in my own compositional practice, I've had fantastic opportunities to write for ensembles like the MSO. I mean, what a wonderful opportunity. I've written for lots of Australia's leading quartets and other ensembles, Rubik's Collective, Plexus Ensemble, you name it. But I feel that to connect to First Nations musicians, now that's an interesting story to tell. And when I was looking at all these incredible ensembles I'm playing for, composing for Goldner Quartet, Flinders Quartet, no First Nations players in any of them. Works that I'm writing for Sydney Symphony, for Adelaide Symphony, no First Nations players. And just as Short Black Opera stepped into that breach 12 years ago and said, well, there should be First Nations opera singers, because we know there are talented people out there with not only with the voices, but with the passion and the desire. I knew that would be true of orchestral musicians as well. So Ensemble Dutala was born. It was born on one day in January. The day in January happens to be January 25. In 1788, January the 25th was the last day of true self-determination for First Nations people on this continent. And so we've captured that moment, and we come together, as we have done the last 2 years, on January the 25th. All of the First Nations orchestral musicians who were trained to a sufficient level, to a professional level, I begin to bring them together in Melbourne so that we could play together. It didn't mean that we wouldn't play with everybody else in the playground, but we wanted to play together. We wanted to see how that felt, how that sounded, and it's been a wonderful opportunity. And to have Allara Briggs-Pattison and to have Aaron Wyatt here this evening it's such a joy for me to see the journey that we've already been on these last 2 years, and to say, Aaron, we are so incredibly thrilled that you have accepted the position of director of Australia's first First Nations orchestral ensemble, Ensemble Dutala.
Awesome, thanks, Deborah.
It's just fantastic, Deborah, hearing you talk about this. It's a really historic development in our musical culture. And I'm just so inspired by everything that you do, particularly this project just sounds amazing. It's something close to my heart, obviously, working with orchestras, and I take on board everything that you've said about representation in our classical music institutions and the need to address that. And this is just wonderful. Why don't we now have a chat to you both, as you're involved in these ensembles. Reading your bios, it's extraordinary how much you've done, and also the multifaceted nature of your musical backgrounds. Maybe Allara first. What drew you, I mean, I know you do so many different things, but you're first and foremost a musician, but what drew you to classical music? And how did it all happen? How did you start performing professionally in this kind of world of classical music?
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for inviting us to be a part of this for NAIDOC Week, and pay my respects to the Bunurong the Kulin Nations, and send my big love to you, Deb, out there on Noongar country, and yeah, just pay my respects to all First Nations people tuning in, and also every single person whose ancestors are with us today and tuning in from the internet waves. And for me, classical music is something that's always been like pretty cool. And I felt like a real dork for thinking it was cool.
Join the club.
No offense. And I don't really talk about it much in public, but it is a secret love of mine. And yeah, as a student, like going through high school, I started playing double bass in year 9. And I played in the orchestra at school, and then by year 11 I joined the State School Spectacular in 2020,
Yep.
which was pretty phenomenal. And I think one of my favourite pieces was the Vivaldi Spring of the Four Seasons.
Yeah.
And the feeling that you get when you sit in an orchestra and play and you can feel the vibrations around you. And I think maybe that's part of why I love playing bass, is because like you can always feel that the physical vibrations. It's not just an audio. It's like you really feel it all around you. And I think that's part of the connection to country, and a part of a connection to who we are as people, and First Nations people as well. But yeah, I think for me, I had taken a big break from classical music. I studied a Bachelor of Music at Box Hill Institute.
Yep.
So I got more into kind of like jazz, soul,
Yep.
new soul, and was playing more electric bass.
Yeah.
And then I learned about Esperanza Spalding, and I was like all about the jazz and funk. And then meeting Deb and moving, I guess, being more inspired, because before I met Deb and was invited to play in the One Day in January project, and before Ensemble de Tala, I was always the only like Aboriginal person in the orchestra or the band. Like, I don't remember any bands that I was in growing up or through uni that there was another Aboriginal person in the room with me.
It's almost unimaginable to think that you haven't had the role models to follow the path, so now you're making the path. You're making the path yourself. You've had people like Deborah who've opened the world up and shown possibilities, but I can't relate to that experience, obviously, but it's wonderful to hear you talk about that, and the fact that you've embraced the possibilities of classical music as a means of expression as well, because you compose.
Yeah.
You're not, I mean, classical music, what does it even mean now in our sort of genre blurring world that we're in?
Yeah, we're all like neo-genre.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, your career is fascinating from that point of view. I was really interested to read about your work with electronics and the bass and looping and things like that.
Yep.
I remember meeting Warren Ellis, the collaborator of Nick Cave. He does a lot of that with his violin.
Yep.
But, you know, the possibilities are endless when you're bringing all of these different elements of music together. So I'll ask you another question about your music in a moment.
Yep.
But first, Aaron, tell us about your musical journey to this point as well, and what it is about classical music that drew you to it.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd just always been drawn to it since I was a young child, and I think it's partly due to a family friend we had who had a piano, and I was really always intrigued by it. Wanted to start piano lessons, but my parents thought I was sort of too small to be able to reach all the keys, and so started on violin, and kind of just stayed there ever since until I moved to viola, sort of right towards the end of high school. But yeah, it's funny because my parents aren't particularly musical themselves, so it kind of came a bit out of nowhere. But they were always very encouraging, which is, I think, a hugely important thing, and probably why I'm still here, why I'm sitting here right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went through the youth orchestra system back in Perth, started in the really sort of junior WAO string orchestras, and sort of then worked up to the Philharmonic and then the main orchestra, the WA Youth Orchestra.
Peter Moore.
And yeah, with good old Pete.
Great guy.
And it was often, I guess, as much a social thing as it was a musical thing. So I had a great bunch of friends who I sort of got along really well with, and yeah, as Allara was saying, it sort of feels very nerdy enjoying classical music. So at least I had this bunch of people who I could sort of enjoy that with. And so beyond that, I mean, I'd never really contemplated doing music as a career all that seriously until I sort of went to uni, did a year of science and engineering, and I enjoyed it, but I couldn't see myself doing it as a career. And at that stage, I was sort of getting to the age where I'd only have a few more years left in the youth orchestra, and just couldn't imagine not playing in sort of in a high quality sort of orchestra for the rest of my life. So I kind of switched to music, and then the rest is sort of history, really.
Started playing with West Australian Symphony, and
Yeah.
how long's that been? I'm not sure if we got that before.
Yeah, that was I think just over 11 years as a casual.
Super experienced orchestral musician. I mean, was that one of the attractions, playing in a group? I mean, you mentioned also you can't imagine not doing it, and I think that's the test for musicians, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, I think it's that coming together to create something that just feels greater than the sum of its parts. And Wazzo's done some amazing stuff throughout the years. I mean, I think we were really, really lucky to have Asher Fish join us as principal conductor, and just doing things like the Beethoven Festival, the Brahms Festival, going on tour to China and Abu Dhabi, doing various regional tours, and playing in a lot of the main season masters and great classics programs has been just fantastic.
Yeah, the orchestra's been on a real ascent, hasn't it? For the last few years now, that's for sure. So, Allara, I'd like to ask you, which First Nations artists and organisations continue to inspire you now?
Yeah, so many. Definitely, Deborah is a huge one, and if it wasn't for her dedication and resilience and compassion and understanding of me as a person, but also the way I guess interact with the musical world, and I really resonate what you were saying. I think it might have been off camera, but how isolating it is to practice by yourself in a room for hours and hours and hours. And I've always just loved being around lots of people, and have before COVID been quite a social butterfly. And so I really struggle with the practice, and that's why I think I really connect with the loop station, because I can be like lots of me all in the one place, and be like connecting with all these different layers and textures, but not be with other people. And so coming back into the orchestra, Deb was really, really kind, because I said, I don't think I can play with other people anymore. I don't know how to do it. It's really scary. And yeah, there was a number of times where I was like, I don't think I can come. Like, I can't do it. I don't know. Deb was just always super encouraging and really, really kind, and was like, just come. It'll be right. Like, and was always really beautiful in the way she encouraged me to come along. And then, I was also really intimidated by you, Aaron, because you were so good. And I was like, I don't know how to use a bow.
It's been so long.
Yeah. So definitely Deb and all of her work with the Dangala Children's Choir and Short Black Opera. And you mentioned as well, Bangara, always have thought that they're absolutely amazing. And then again, there's the work of Songlines, Indigenous Music Corporation, Aboriginal Music Corporation, who put on Share the Spirit every year on the 26th. And I've always really loved the work that they've been doing, and particularly the last kind of 12 months to 2 years, they've been doing some absolutely amazing stuff for First Nations artists. So. And supporting me as well in all the different random places that I'm going and being. And then, of course, there's a few special people I'd like to acknowledge, and that's Uncle Archie Roach, and also someone who's really become my auntie in the past few years since working with Uncle Archie, where I met her, and that's Nancy Bates. And she's been another person who's always backed me and encouraged me, and brings everyone into a community and shows you the love that you didn't really, that I didn't get when I was in those orchestras. There's no one to I guess there's just a lack of understanding and feeling really alone, and like no one understands you as an Aboriginal person, let alone an Aboriginal musician. In some of the whitest and some of the like least culturally sensitive places. And so, yeah, all of those people have like been massive contributors to, I guess, where I'm at. So yeah, big love and thank you to all of you.
Oh, that's great to hear you speak so fondly about those people who've believed in you, and obviously with really good reason. Let's be honest, Allara.
Thank you.
So, Deborah, this brings us to a discussion. I think my timeline's out the window now, but whatever. Music and reconciliation, and the role that it can play in educating people, because this is something that we've spoken about previously, particularly in relation to your extraordinary War Requiem for Peace, You Morella, which we performed last year in the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra season, which was such an extraordinary learning experience for all of us, really, really revealing and unforgettable. How do you see this relationship between art and activism, and particularly in the classical music area?
I think this is a really important conversation right now, because art, we would feel right, we would feel justified in feeling abandoned throughout this process of this pandemic. Not just overlooked, but really set adrift. But you know what? Music will survive. We will survive. I have absolutely no doubt about that. Yes, it becomes more difficult when certainly governments ignore your contribution and leave you to fend for yourselves. But we will definitely survive. We are resilient, and I think we're seeing the resilience now as we emerge on the other side of what we've been through in 2020. For First Nations people across Australia, music is more than something to passively take in. It's more than being a member of an audience or even a member of an ensemble. Music is our very way of knowing the world and giving meaning to everything in it. And more than that, for Australia, I would say that at one point in everyone's history, their ancestors had the same experience. Music and the arts as a way of knowing. That all the busyness that we build into our lives, all of these systems that we construct, all of the things that we build, all of the things that we do, why do we do them? Why do we strive? If not to give ourselves the opportunity to know ourselves more deeply. And how do we do that? Through the arts. So the necessity of the arts to our world, the necessity of the arts to Australians, whoever you are, whether you recognise it or whether you live and breathe that necessity and the understanding of it, that doesn't make any difference, really. It is necessary as a way of knowing. It is the reason that we strive, so that we might know ourselves. And so I feel like whatever the genre happens to be, whether it's classical music, and as you say, Ben, in your introduction, what is classical music? It's so cross genre now. But if we think of art music, if we think of jazz, if we think of any form of contemporary music, as long as the narrative is true, as long as you are making it personal to your music practice, then it will empower you to reach into the humanity of another person's life, to reach into their soul. In fact, music will convey a meaning, an understanding that will transcend the analytical every day, and it will transcend and carry meaning and truth directly into the soul. That's why music is necessary. And actually, it would be so much easier if everybody did acknowledge that, of course. But We won't ever arrive at a point where everybody acknowledges it equally, but that's beside the point, because the truth is music is necessary for our lives. It is impossible to exist without music.
Hear, hear. And it's fascinating to me that it's in many ways to non-musicians or to people who don't seek music out in their lives, a very abstract art form. And that's its wonder, is in this fact that something so abstract can communicate so deeply and so singularly to us. And through the works that you've written, the stories you've told, you've shown the potential of music in that space as well. And Allara, it's similar to you. I know you're very passionate about environmental issues. You've incorporated those into your music. You've used it as the kind of driver for some of your compositions. Tell us a little bit about how those two things come together in your musical world.
Yeah, sure. Well, for me, I guess I don't really see environmental issues and music as separate. And music is a part of the environment. And so we're really just reinterpreting it and then representing it. And so for my work, I guess that's part of how I experience the world and experience those issues and experience the sounds that I hear all around me. And that's, I guess sometimes it doesn't really feel like I'm necessarily writing. Sometimes it's like I'll do the work, I'll research a certain thing, I'll have big yarns with different people about different issues. And then I just express it through music and it kind of just comes out. Yeah. So I think that it's really just that extension of the way that the earth is communicating through us and through artists. Yeah. And the part of why I'm really passionate about the work that I do is because not only it's something that our people have always done since the beginning of time, and that's how we've come to be, like without song and without ceremony and without dance, none of us would be sitting here. And that's how we've cared for country over thousands of years, and that's how we know how to take care of the river and know how to look after the fish and know when the seasons are supposed to be changing. And so I think with my music, what I want to do is reconnect more with those learnings and understandings and connections to country and share that with the broader, with more people, because you can't care about something that you don't understand. Like, it's really hard to care about something if you have no connection and no understanding to it. And I think with climate change and climate justice, there's a lot of people that just are like, oh, I'll go for a walk on the mountain on the weekend, but don't cut the trees down, but like don't do anything actively to change that from happening. And we're just at a point where we can't go any further on day-to-day business as usual. Like, the earth is cooking, Indigenous countries being destroyed every day. Like, look at Japarang and the trees out there. And I just think that there's a lot of work to be done, and that music is an incredible vessel to tell our stories and continue caring for our country.
Yeah, hear, and that passion, I'm sure, comes through strongly in your work as well. I know we're going to be getting on to some music. You're going to be performing for us, Aaron, as well. Next year we're really looking forward to the premiere of this work, Nanyubak, that Deborah's written for you and the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. It's going to be in our first of the Hamer Hall series concerts in its full version. Tell us a little bit about the piece and the section that you're going to be performing for us tonight.
So I'm just going to be performing, I guess, the introductory part of it. So I'm sort of still finding my way around it, coming to terms with it, because it's it's a hot off the presses kind of work. But it starts in a very sort of, I guess, raw way, and kind of has a sort of very searching feel, as you'll hear in a few minutes. This searching feel to it at the start, and there's some really just lovely lyrical lines that Deborah's written. I'm looking forward to seeing how it all comes together and what gets written beyond this, and how the orchestrations are all going to end up working. So I know Deborah's been sort of hard at work on that at the moment. But yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
Because having an Indigenous composer and an Indigenous soloist with one of the state symphony orchestras is probably something that hasn't really been done all that much before, outside of people like William Barton, of course. But certainly I don't know of any other string players.
No, I don't either. I'm so excited about that, by the way. I literally can't wait.
Yeah.
I just can't wait. For that
Excited
concert.
and slightly nervous. I mean,
That's the perfect combination. Terrified and excited.
I would say at this point, for Allara and for myself, it's very exciting to have the language of Yorta Yorta, which we share in common, as the title for this work, Nunyabak, meaning dreaming. There are parts of this work that will be more nightmarish than dreaming. So there's the shared understanding of what dreaming is, the subconscious. There's also the traditional meaning for First Nations people of a law that exists in the sort of four-dimensional way, in a way that time is not the same for First Nations people. And it's not linear, it's layered. And so are the layers of Nunyabak. And when it comes together with the orchestration, and Ben and I were talking about this off camera before, I have the orchestration, the instrumentation of Beethoven's Third Symphony. And he hadn't got around to adding any trombones at that stage. I'd love to add a couple of trombones to this instrumentation, MSO, if you're listening. I just love the trombone. I studied it, can you believe, at Conservatorium when I was doing my degree in Sydney.
Didn't know that.
No, I was dreadful. You wouldn't want to know, but I really did enjoy it. All the same, this is my first concerto, and this movement, which will eventually be about 10 minutes in length. It will be a concerto for Aaron, and this will be the first movement that everyone will have a chance to hear in Hamer Hall at the end of February in 2021. So it's an honour and a privilege to write for Aaron, but it's certainly an honour and a privilege to have this ongoing relationship with MSO.
Well, in a moment we're going to be hearing an excerpt from Nunyabak performed by you, Aaron. But first, we do have a video to play for you about a real high point I mentioned of our season last year, which was Deborah Cheetham's War Requiem for Peace, Umarella, which was an enormous scale production bringing multiple choirs, the Dangala Children's Choir we mentioned, a cast of soloists, the Melbourne Youth Orchestra, Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. It was just an extraordinary, and artworks as well, which were a huge part of the presentation of Umarella as well. And we have a video montage to play for you, which is performing Umarella. Here it is.
We tell stories so that we can build understanding, empathy, trust, and connection as humans. Just as our stories define us, the stories of others also show us who we are and who we can strive to become. Deborah Cheetham's Umarella, A War Requiem for Peace, is such a story. Harrowing, shocking, devastating, but told with such grace, generosity of spirit, ultimate optimism, and the will to connect us through its telling, so we can stride hand in hand into the future.
Umarella was particularly special because of how deeply meaningful it was to everyone involved. Being lucky enough to be part of the on-country premiere in Port Fairy was one of the highlights of that year for me, not just because I'd had such a special relationship with making music in Port Fairy in the past, but also because I realised that the work itself connected us all, members of the Gunditjmara community that were at the premiere, performers, many of whom had had long-standing musical histories and connections with one another, and Deborah.
Being part of Umarella by Deborah Cheetham was like riding the inevitable wave of change that this society really needs and is embracing, I have to say.
As we sang and as we played, felt like we were reframing and reshaping the whole discussion around Australian history and how it's been told, and what it means.
It was like watching history being made. This piece is like a turning point for this society, and to be a part of that, even just a small part sitting in the violin section, was like watching history come to life. People are going to look back on Umarella as an incredibly important change in not only our programming, but what audiences really, truly embrace.
Deborah Cheetham sat me down, and I learnt a lot that day about what really had gone on. Some of the things that we were never really told about. I think a lot of people still don't really know about them. In a way, the truth had been smudged when history was taught to us. So there was a sense of anger and betrayal around this whole area, which being part of Umarella really brought up. But overall, a sort of a feeling that from this point, now that many of the truths have been spoken, and being involved in the speaking of those truths was very, I feel very proud and lucky to have been a part of that. From here, the conversation can really start to stretch out in more helpful ways for the future.
I think we can't forget that the Aboriginal culture is the oldest continuous living culture on the planet. And to my knowledge, I think that prior to colonisation, the estimate is that there were about 3,000 to 4,000 speakers on average for each of the 250 Aboriginal languages that existed. And a number of these languages were almost immediately wiped out within decades of colonisation. And in, I think, 1990, it was estimated that 90 languages still survived of the approximately 250 that were once spoken. That overall trend implies that we're going to lose these languages in the not too distant future if they're not preserved. And with losing those languages, we're also going to lose the incredible repository of knowledge and traditions and culture that goes along with that. So having such an important musical work help to rebuild this knowledge and preserve it is about the most important thing we could be doing.
I was among the privileged few to premiere this retelling of Gunditjmara history on Gunditjmara land in southwest Victoria at the closing of the 29th Port Fairy Spring Music Festival in October 2018. We played and sang to a packed house of humans from different cultures, histories and perspectives. And it was a deeply confronting, yet ultimately uplifting event. When we premiered the orchestral version with MSO in 2019, the piece had the same profound effect on every human in the room. We were transformed by knowledge, connection, and hope. In crafting this story through music and language, Deborah Cheetham is showing Australians the way to communication, understanding, and healing.
How do you confront an audience and tell them your ancestors did this to my ancestors, and you haven't really been telling the truth about it ever since? You've been smudging it, or the people that teach you have been smudging it, the people that write it have been smudging it. And by choosing this Requiem Mass as a form, Deborah has clearly said, I'm educated in the same ways you are. I understand the vehicle of your souls, and I'm going to use this, but with the words of these ancient peoples, and that way you might get the message.
The audience's response to Umarella when the MSO performed it was quite incredible. It's almost as if the audience also understood how important this work was to be created and to be performed. So I guess when the audience listens to, say, Beethoven 9 or Mozart Requiem, they're thinking, I know this piece, I love this piece. But with this piece, no one had heard it. They knew what it was about. They knew how important it was. And so the reaction from the audience was extremely emotional.
Thank you for that wonderful performance, Aaron. It's just wonderful to hear you play. You make such an extraordinary sound on that viola, and that was an excerpt from Nunyubuck, which we'll be hearing the full orchestral version of in our first of our Hamer Hall concerts next year, the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra season. And we're really, really looking forward to that and very excited about it. It's very interesting to hear the genesis of a new work coming to life like this, and it'll be fascinating to see how it evolves over the coming months leading up to the premiere. And so Deborah Cheetham is joining us again from Perth with a very exciting announcement about a new scholarship. You talked about the one day in January. Now tell us about this new scholarship.
I'm so excited to be announcing this evening that Short Black Opera, through its new initiative, Dutala Ensemble, will award annually a scholarship or scholarships to young, upcoming First Nations orchestral musicians, those young men and women who have stayed the course, locked themselves away in those practice rooms, gone through all those AMEB or Trinity exams, and want to set their sights on a pathway into the world of classical orchestral music. We want to make sure that pathway is there for them, and not only there for them, but illuminated. We want to provide opportunities for those musicians who are out there across this beautiful continent of ours. And so I'm very pleased to announce the inaugural One Day in January scholarship will this year be awarded to Gamilaroi cellist Jackson Worley.
Great. I believe we have a speech from Jackson as well to play.
Yama, Yorta Yorta, Gaya Mao, Jackson Gamilaroi, Bigabil and Nundle D. Hello, my name's Jackson Worley. I live in Nundle and I'm from Gamilaroi country and my totem is an echidna. I'm currently right now with my auntie Debbie out on country as she's doing her doctoral research by creating a series of artworks. I'm collaborating with her and creating a film with music that is composed by me for an upcoming exhibition. I'm extremely honoured and extremely thrilled to have received the inaugural Short Black Opera Scholarship. I'm looking forward to working with everybody that is associated and I can't wait. I will see you guys soon and thank you so much for letting me receive this scholarship. Yalu.
Congratulations to you, Jackson. What a wonderful honour it is to be the recipient of this One Day January scholarship, and we wish you all the very best for the future. Look forward to hearing the things that you're going to be doing in the future. So Deborah, this brings us to a conversation about another work of yours, an existing work called Gulaga, and we're going to be hearing this work performed in a moment by members of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. I know this is a particularly meaningful work for you. Tell us why. What is so special about Gulaga to you?
Well, if you've ever had the pleasure of travelling down the south coast of New South Wales, say down around Narooma or Bermagui Way, that's Yuin country, my grandfather's country. And you can't miss it. Gulaga is a beautiful mountain. It's known to the Yuin people as Mother Mountain. I say you can't miss it, but when I was 15, in one of my other identities, in another lifetime ago, I was a flautist, an okay flautist. And I travelled down the south coast on tour with the Sydney Symphonic Wind Ensemble. Hello to everybody who is alum of the Sydney School Symphonic Wind Ensemble, or SWE as it was known.
I remember. Yeah.
Do you remember Swee?
I do, of course, yeah.
Some of my best friends, I made in Swee. But I was travelling down with the other members of the ensemble, and we arrived in Narooma. And if you've ever been to Narooma, you can go to the lookout there and you can see on a clear day all the way up the New South Wales coastline. It seems to go forever, and it is a magical place. They call it the Sapphire Coast, but you know how deeply in love the Yuin people would have been with their land and still are to this day. It entered into my soul. Now, as a 15-year-old, I didn't know very much about my Aboriginal family. As many people viewing our conversation today will know, I'm a member of the Stolen Generations. And at 15, I didn't know very much at all. But I looked at that place and it went into my subconscious. Now, I've talked about the view of the coastline. I've talked about the beautiful sapphire sea, and that's what people see. But there's a mountain there. More recently, it became known as Mount Dromedary, but its true name is Gulaga, Mother Mountain. I can't tell you if at 15 I actually saw consciously the mountain, but it went into my subconscious. And from the age of 15 to the age of 52, I dreamt of that mountain. I didn't know where the mountain was. It was just in my dreams, constantly coming to me night after night. The age of 52, my cousin, Frances Little, the only daughter of Jimmy Little, my mother's eldest brother, she said, I think that we should get you and your siblings together, as many of them as can come together, and we should go down to the south coast of New South Wales. We should go down and pay honour to our grandfather, who was a Yuin man. And we should go down and we should climb Gulaga Mountain. Well, we did this. And as we approached the mountain, I realised it was the mountain that was in my dreams, that had been coming to me night after night since the age of 15. I can't even tell you if I saw it that day when I got off the bus in Narooma as a 15-year-old, but it saw me and it was calling to me. It was my grandfather's country. And so I had to write in response to that. I got my opportunity last year in the Australia series with the Canberra Symphony Orchestra. And Matthew Heinsohn had commissioned this work from me, and I wrote it as a trio for woodwind. And it basically tells the story of standing on Gulaga Mountain and looking out at the ocean and realizing that this was the land of my grandfather's ancestors and that it had known me since the age of 15. Oh, well, it had known me before that. And I was getting to know it. And I was there with members of my family that I'd never spent any social time with before. My older brother, Anthony, and his children and his partner. And we went through some ceremony on the mountain. We oaked up, we walked to the top, and we breathed in the silence and the heartbeat of that mountain. You know, we were a family coming together for the first time, and my cousin Frances was also there. So there's all the busyness of trying to fit a lifetime full of not knowing each other and into conversations as we jolted our way up the side of the mountain in the four-wheel drives, and that is in the music as well. But what you hear is the expanse of Gulaga and its surrounding lands, and a country that is so deeply embedded in my DNA that this piece of music, I think, was waiting to be written for every year of my life since I was 15.
It's just a spellbinding story of the genesis of the work, Deborah. We're going to be hearing it in a moment performed by musicians of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, who I'll introduce. But as we near the end of tonight's event, I just wanted to thank you so much, not just for joining us tonight, but for everything that you do for the Australian people, for Indigenous people, for non-Indigenous people, for bringing us all together. Because, you know, you have taken this orchestra, the members of this orchestra, on a journey. I think you do that with everyone that you meet. And it's a journey of unifying people and of deeper understanding and a meaningful embrace of First Nations culture. And without that, we can't be unified, in my opinion. And I'm just so grateful to you for being here tonight and just for being who you are. So thank you very much, Deborah, for joining us.
Ben, thanks so much, and thanks to the MSO, and thank you to the ABC, who's really, you're in Iwaki. We're broadcasting from Iwaki tonight, and that's part of the ABC. And if we remember that all of the state orchestras were once ABC orchestras, and Sir Bernard Hines and the role that he played in initiating that. But I'm so glad that the orchestras are sufficiently collegial in their outlook to know that although MSO is leading the way, this relationship is, it's reciprocal, which is truly a First Nations way of doing things. The other orchestras are sufficiently collegial to say, well, we want to do that too on the nations that we live on. And I'm so glad to see that that's happening. But I'm so proud that MSO has led the way in this particular way of telling the story that is yet to be told and sharing that story with all Australians.
Well, it's a special partnership and one that we're incredibly proud of. I know I speak on behalf of everyone involved with the organisation. And it's also been wonderful to have you both here with us tonight, Allara Briggs-Pattison and Aaron Wyatt, to hear about your future projects and things that you've been doing. I can't wait to see how your careers continue to unfold and continue to enrich Australian musical culture as well. So thank you so much for joining us for your beautiful performance tonight. I'm looking forward to hearing some more of your music too, Allara. It sounds really fascinating. So thank you very much for being here. Our musicians from the MSO will be joining us in a moment, but it really brings us to the end of this special NAIDOC Week presentation, Always Was, Always Will Be. And as I mentioned, we leave you with music of Deborah Cheetham, this extraordinary piece of music, Gulaga, for wind trio. It's going to be performed by some of the greatest musicians I've ever had the privilege of hearing play. The principal flute of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, Prudence Davis, the principal oboe, Geoffrey Crellin, and the principal clarinet, David Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us, and good night.